Check out FlipsideGaming.com for all your gaming needs. Use the promo code HEROES to save 10% on all orders over $10. Additionally, from December 12th, 2019 through January 27th, 2020, if you use this promo code, you will automatically be entered into a drawing to win a Theros Beyond Death Draft Booster Box. Also, there is another way to enter where no purchase is necessary. See the link in the description below for full details. Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to another day of Theros Beyond Death previews. A lot of cards to take a look at today. Before we get started, though, a couple reminders. One, if you're curious as to which content creator premiered which card today, just check out the description below. All the information is down there. Also, if you go over to FlipsideGaming.com, you can use that Heroes promo code, save 10% on orders over $10. And if you do that right now, you might be able to win a draft booster box of Theros Beyond Death. Those details also in the description below. And whenever you use that promo code, it also supports the channel. So thank you. And without any further ado, let's get into it. Before we get into the new stuff, we got to look at 4 of the cards that we saw yesterday in their specialty variants. So if you want to hear my thoughts on these particular cards, check out yesterday's video. I'll link it at the end here. But since we didn't see these variations of the cards, I thought I'd quickly show them to you. There's Eidolon of Obstruction, Tyrannica, a Crowan Veteran, Calyx, Destiny's Hand, and Enigmatic Incarnation. Okay, on to the new stuff. This first group of cards we're going to look at are from the Planeswalker decks, which means they are not in draft booster packs. We already saw the Planeswalkers a few weeks back, but today we're seeing the rest of those cards that can only be found in either the Planeswalker decks or sometimes in collector boosters in the ancillary spot. So the first 3 are found in the Elspeth deck, and here's the first one, Eidolon of Inspiration. Okay, so when Wizards creates these cards, they're trying to make something that is going to help new players understand how to play Magic. They're typically not too complicated. They try not to push the power level too much. They don't want these necessarily making their way into standard decks because they are a little harder to get a hold of, and these products are meant for newer players. Basically, they typically design good limited cards, but since they're not in draft packs, you never get a chance to really play them in limited. But that's what you're seeing here with this particular card. I don't really have much to add to it. Elspeth's Devotee, they also like to put a card in there that helps you kind of tutor up the Planeswalker, whether it's in the deck or in the graveyard. And the main reason for that is the biggest draw of these decks is to actually get to play with the Planeswalker. This is that card for the Elspeth deck. Sunlit Hoplite, the third card from this deck. This one will get a bonus if you have an Elspeth Planeswalker. It doesn't have to be just the one that comes with this deck. And you might remember that this is actually the card Elspeth Undaunted Hero can search for in the library or graveyard and put it directly onto the battlefield. The next 3 cards are from the Ashiok deck. This one is Swimmer and Nightmares. This is the card that rewards you for playing with a Ashiok Planeswalker. It doesn't have to be the one in this product. Next card you'll find is Mindwrack Harpy. Ashiok's Forerunner. This is the card in this deck that lets you go ahead and search up Ashiok Sculptor of Fears. Also, I noticed that if you look at the deck list, Unknown Shores is listed. That has not been announced yet as a card being reprinted, but my assumption is you're going to see that in the regular Theros set, which, if that's the case, it's a pretty good limited color fixing card. Now that we're through the Planeswalker deck cards, let's move on to the cards that you will find in draft packs. Elspeth Conquers Death. Okay, this is a very interesting enchantment saga at Rare. And it's a little reminiscent of the Eldest Reborn. I do think that card is a little better than this one, but this could still see some standard play, maybe in an enchantment build or a mono white devotion deck or some other kind of mid-range deck. So let's take a look at this thing. 2 white and 3. Number 1, exile target permanent and opponent controls with converted mana cost 3 or greater. So exile could be very relevant, and target permanent, anything that costs 3 or more, planeswalker, enchantment, creature, whatever, it's free game. The number 2 may or may not be relevant. It depends on timing and what kind of deck your opponent's playing, but that's okay because the number 3 could be pretty good too. Return target creature or planeswalker card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Put a +1/+1 counter or a loyalty counter on it. So I guess you could take Gideon out of the graveyard, put it in play, and give it a +1/+1 counter. Maybe that would be the correct play sometimes. I don't know. But ultimately, being able to reanimate a creature or get a planeswalker back feels like a very good ability, even though, yes, this does cost 5 and you're going to take a little time to get there. I don't think that's a deal breaker, honestly. For draft or sealed, I think this is a great rare if you get a chance to play with it, for all the reasons that I just mentioned when we were talking about standard. 2 white to go towards devotion while it's on the battlefield. It's an enchantment, so it could trigger Constellation. And even if all three of the abilities weren't always relevant, I think it's safe to say the first ability and third ability a lot of the time will be. Favorite of Iroas, good limited card at uncommon. Actually, a very aggressive card. Boros will like that. Also, the Selesnya color pairing is going to be using a lot of auras. So the aura will trigger Constellation, and you could put an aura on this maybe to buff it. Fits very nicely into both of those limited game plans. Heliod's Pilgrim, this one is a reprint actually. Pretty good common if you have a fair amount of auras in your deck. I do think Selesnya will appreciate this card the most in Draft or Sealed. But again, if you just have enough auras, it's very playable no matter what you're doing. Hero of the Pride. For Draft and Sealed, I'm already sold. You know why? It's a 2/2 for 2 with upside. It's a common 2. You should get your hands on these relatively easily. Best in the Boros build, I would say, because it is an aggressive creature. And there's a few cards in the set that have the quote-unquote heroic ability on them, but they don't call it heroic this time. And they all fall under the Boros colors. So yeah, this would be good for that game plan. Also good for Selesnya again, because the auras could also trigger this. Triumphant Surge. This is a good white removal card for Draft or Sealed. Nothing crazy here. It's a forecasting cost instant at common, so you'll be able to get your hands on this hopefully if you need it. It destroys target creature with power 4 or greater, so it is conditional, but you gain 3 life, and you know there's going to be a lot of larger creatures when you play Sealed or Draft. The Gruul colors especially care about 4 power creatures. Thassa's Intervention. Okay, I love these cards that let me make a decision. If you watch the channel, you know that I feel like the more input I have into what a card does, the more powerful it is. Flexibility is a good thing to have on a Magic card. Aside from that, this one is just pushed anyway. 2 blue and X, instant speed, choose one, look at the top X cards of your library, put up to 2 of them into your hand, the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order, or counter target spell unless its controller pays twice X. So you have this in your hand. If you need to use it as a counterspell, it's a pretty efficient counterspell. If you don't, at the end of your opponent's turn, maybe you need an answer for something that's already on the battlefield. Maybe you need to get some offense on the battlefield. Then okay, depending on how much mana I have, I could see a fair amount of cards and I get to take 2 of them. That feels really good. This is going to see standard play, I have no doubt. I could throw this right now into a Simic Flash build and be happy with it. There could be a Mono Blue Devotion deck next season that might play it. Other control builds in the format will be interested in it. Pioneer, I think this card is good enough to see play in that format. It's an awesome limited rare if you're lucky enough to play with it. Good commander card too. Agonizing Remorse. This is a good one. Black and 1, sorcery uncommon. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it, or a card from their graveyard. Exile the card and you lose 1 life. I'm not too worried about losing the life there. So basically, if I don't want to use Thought Erasure, which could be for a couple reasons. 1, I'm not playing blue. Maybe I'm trying to play Mono Black Devotion. Or if I care about what's going on in the graveyard, which in the upcoming standard meta, I probably will. We're getting a lot of escape cards and other graveyard interactions in this set. Then yeah, this could be the card of choice when it comes to digging into somebody's hand. I do think you're going to see control decks playing this next season in standard. And like I said, Mono Black Devotion might like this too for hand disruption. If graveyard interactions become an issue in the standard meta, you might even see some other decks running this at least out of the sideboard. Limited, this is going to be good for you there too. It only costs 2. Early on, you can disrupt your opponent's hands. Later on, you can disrupt the graveyard, which I do think is going to be important in a lot of the limited games. And it's an uncommon. You'll be able to find these floating around. If your deck is a little more aggressive, you might skip this, but remember it's in your sideboard if you do need it. Elspeth's Nightmare. Okay, this is an uncommon saga now. And all these things that it does, I do feel like there's more efficient ways to do them in the standard environment, so I'm not really feeling it there. But again, in limited, I'd be really happy to play this. Like the other saga we saw, sure, some of these could miss, but I'm willing to take the risk because this isn't that much of a commitment, a black and 2. The first ability there will probably always hit something in a game or Draft or Sealed. The second one's interesting because it creates a situation where your opponent has to kind of use it or lose it, as far as non-creature and non-land cards that might be in their hand that they care about. And the third one could hose Escape. This is another example of a card that's good and limited early because of the first and even second ability, but also good late because of the third ability. Additionally, it could trigger Constellation because it is an enchantment, and it can contribute to your Black Devotion at least for a little while. This one's a Portuguese language preview, Nightmare Shepherd. Let's talk limited first. This is a 4/4 for 4 with flying, so I'm pretty happy to play it just for that reason. But it does more than that. It is an enchantment, which could definitely matter. It's got 2 black in the casting cost, so Black Devotion could matter as well. And the ability is quite good. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, you may exile it. If you do, you create a token that's a copy of that creature, except its base power and toughness is 1/1, and it's a nightmare in addition to its other types. So this gives you an option. Whenever one of your creatures dies, you have to look at the board state and what you're doing and decide, is it better to populate the graveyard and just let the creature die? Or is it better to have a token copy of the creature as a 1/1? If the creature has a great ability that you want to use more of, then sure, you make the token. If you care about escape or some other graveyard shenanigans, then maybe you just go ahead and let the creature go to the graveyard. So for a limited game, it doesn't really matter. Whatever your strategy is, you can do one or the other, and you still get a great creature to boot for 4 mana. One example would be if you're in the Dimir build in draft, maybe you really care about getting cards in the graveyard, so you're not going to use the ability to make the token. However, Rakdos, they might be a little more open to sacrificing a creature, getting the token so they can sacrifice a creature again later, or being able to sacrifice the creature but still have the ability and something on the battlefield for presence. In Standard, I think this will see play. This could be in a Mono Black Devotion deck, or this does harken back to a more classic version of Sacrifice. Like the Sacrifice decks we've seen recently revolve around Cauldron Familiar or Witch's Oven, but this card would fit into a more classic style of that type of deck, no doubt. This one's a German language preview, Omen of the Dead. It was actually previously leaked, so you may have seen it before, and it is the black portion of the Omen cycle. I like all of these Omens for limited. I think they're very good cards, very playable. Just generally, they have flash, so that's great with Constellation. Also, they can just sit on the battlefield if you want to count them towards Devotion. And if you need to scry later, wonderful, you can always pay to sacrifice and scry too. The first ability on this one lets you take a creature from your graveyard and put it back in your hand. Dimir in limited might appreciate that because you could be milling yourself if you mill a good creature into the yard that you want to take back. There you go. Rakdos might enjoy this as well because they could be sacrificing some creatures, sacrifice something for benefit, take it back with this card, play it, do it again. Ultimately, very playable common. Also, too, I think Mono Black decks and Pauper could be very interested in this. Heroes of the Revel. This is a very simple uncommon for limited that actually checks a lot of boxes for this limited environment. Let's say I'm playing Rakdos. I might be interested in this because I get a 1/1 red satyr creature token when it enters the battlefield. That token says this creature can't block. Might be good sacrifice fodder. If I'm in Boros, this is a 5-drop that keeps the pressure on. It's a 4/4, it has some size, but it's got that quote-unquote heroic ability on it too. Whenever you cast a spell that targets this, creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. That combined with the aggro token would be good in an aggressive build. And also you're getting 5/5 power toughness on the battlefield for 5 mana, which feels pretty efficient. If I'm in Gruul colors, Gruul cares about creatures with power 4 or greater, so this could work well with some of the cards there. It is also a satyr if you are lucky enough to also get Gallia of the Endless Dance. Ultimately, it's going to fit into a lot of different strategies, and it could be a relatively sought-after uncommon at the draft table. With that being said, when we're talking about 5 casting cost, it does have some competition, I'm sure, for some more powerful cards. Might not always make your cut, but I think a lot of the time you're going to play this and be happy with it. Here's a German language preview, Loathsome Chimera. Usually when I see these type of cards, I get a little nervous even for draft or sealed because I don't like them to trade down. So if I pay 3 for this and I end up getting into combat with a 2/2 for 2, okay, I don't like that loss of efficiency, but this card's a little different because it has escape. So if that happens, alright, it might not feel great in the moment, but I can bring this card back later. Now granted, I have to pay a green and 4, exile 3 cards from my graveyard to do so. It does come back with a +1/+1 counter though, making it a 5/2. It could still trade down, right? Like it could still trade for another 2-drop. But I could always bring it back a 3rd time potentially, as long as I have enough cards in my graveyard and I can pay the mana at some point. So that persistence goes a long way for me. I like this a lot better than I would like a 4/1 for 3 that has maybe some other ability on it. Now, ultimately, I think this is going to be a good card for draft or sealed because it also ties into some of the strategies. Gruul, it is a creature with power 4 or greater, so there's going to be cards that care about that in those colors. Or Golgari might be able to make the best use of the escape ability here. This one's a Spanish language preview, and this one is a big uncommon. Mystical Renewal, it costs 1 green. It's an instant. Put target enchantments on the bottom of its owner's library. What? Okay. So let's talk standard first. This hits gods. This hits escape cards if you don't want them to go to the graveyard. This takes care of some big enchantments that we've seen in the standard format. Fires of Invention, Cavalcade of Calamity, Experimental Frenzy. I don't know why I'm just thinking of red ones right now, but I'm sure there's a whole bunch of others too. In Standard, this could be played out of the sideboard, but depending on the meta, you might just see this end up in main decks. Older formats are going to like this card too. If you have access to green mana and you have a problem on the battlefield in the form of an enchantment, this could be a go-to sideboard card. I'm talking Pioneer, Modern, maybe even Legacy and Vintage. Commander players, you're going to love this too, of course. You know all the crazy big enchantments people try to play in that format. Here's a really elegant answer to them. In Limited, this is going to be fantastic there too. Great uncommon and draft, maybe even first pickable in a lot of packs. It doesn't have to be a sideboard card, remember. You're going to be encountering a lot of enchantments. Enchantment creatures, auras, and just regular old enchantments. You're going to find a target for this easily. Nyxbloom Ancient, this is the last mythic of the set, and what? This is crazy. 3 green and 4, enchantment creature elemental, 5/5 trample. If you tap a permanent mind you, for mana, it produces 3 times as much of that mana instead. So not just land, a permanent. Not just a mana rock, a permanent. Not just a mana dork, a permanent. So any of these things. Obviously, you're going to get tons of value out of this card in Commander. This is where you want to play it mostly. Commander, you can do some crazy things with all this mana. As a matter of fact, sometimes the person that wins the Commander game is the one that has the most mana available to them at any given time. And because of that, I can see this showing up on a lot of Commander tables in the future. What about Limited, though? Let's say I open this in my sealed pool, or I get this passed to me in a draft. Do I want to play with it? Depends on your deck, depends on what's happening, but I do think a lot of the time you will. Let's start with the casting cost, because that's your first obstacle. I'm not too concerned about the fact that this costs 7. I think as long as the environment isn't super fast, and it doesn't appear to be at this point, then yeah, I could play a 7 casting cost creature and be fine. It's a 5/5 trample creature, which is good. Maybe not the most amazing thing for 7, but still pretty good. The thing you do have to worry about, though, is the 3 on color, 3 green. If you don't think your deck can swing that, then maybe you skip this card. Ultimately, if you're going maybe 50% green, 50% other colors, you're probably okay. If you're going heavy amount of green devotion, well, even better. If you're going less than 50%, though, I probably wouldn't risk it. Now, if you do decide to play it, it's an enchantment, which could matter. Like I said, it's a sizable trample creature that will be good for Gruul, for example. But that mana ability could come in very, very handy as well, obviously. Better in some decks than others. I mean, there are times where you could have this on the battlefield and have nothing to do with the mana in draft or sealed. That's not too unusual, but I think a lot of the time you'll either have an X-Spell, you could get an intervention. They're rare, but still, that would be awesome. Or if you had a mana sink on the battlefield. Or you maybe do have a bigger card that you want to play even. So if you can take advantage of that ability, I think this card does become extremely powerful. If you don't really feel like there's a lot of opportunities to do things with big mana in your deck, then maybe you do skip this card if you feel like you have other bombs in your deck that are going to be more consistent for you. Bronze-Hide Lion. This one's a rare. It's reminiscent of Watchwolf, Fleecemane Lion, right? It's in that vein, the 3/3s for 2, costing a green and a white. Now, this one's interesting. It has kind of a reverse bestow type ability. It starts off as a 3/3 creature for 2, which is great economy, and it has the ability that you can pay a green and a white to make it indestructible till end of turn, so it has that persistence as long as you have the mana up. Then when it does die, you get to return it to the battlefield as an aura and put it on a different creature, and it has the activated ability of a green and white. The enchanted creature gains indestructible until end of turn, but it also loses all other abilities. So that means you can't make the aura itself indestructible like you could when it was a creature, and when it goes to the graveyard as an aura, it won't come back. But if you were to flicker it, it would come back as a creature, which is worth noting. Yeah, there's a ton of economy here. This is going to see play maybe in a Selesnya aggressive or mid-range build, and obviously this is an excellent limited card. Granted, it is 2 different colors, but even if you got this out on, say, turn 3 as opposed to turn 2, you're still really pushing the efficiency of this card. And this is still a good card even later in the game because of the abilities. Commander Cat Tribal players, here's a decent cat for you. Dream Trawler. This is a pretty good rare, but it's going to cost you. 2 blue, 2 white, and 2. It's a Sphinx 3/5 flying lifelink. Whenever you draw a card, it will get +1/+0 till end of turn, and whenever it attacks, you get to draw a card. So if you're attacking with this, you most likely drew a card at the start of your turn, and then you also would be able to draw another card off the attack trigger. So it's going to be a 5/5 lifelink creature. If you happen to draw more cards, well, wonderful. And then it has another ability, discard a card, and this will gain hexproof until end of turn, but you have to tap it. That's a great way to protect this against removal. Also, it could populate your graveyard for escape or maybe something else you got going on. I think this could see a little standard play, perhaps in a control build as a finisher. This is one of those creatures that's going to be hard to deal with at times, especially if you're drawing a lot of cards. And it's also going to gain you life. You can protect it by pitching a card when you need to. At the end of the day, your opponent might have a hard time getting rid of this. Limited, it's going to be fantastic there if you're comfortable with the casting cost. I'm not too worried about the total of 6, but 2 blue and 2 white. Some decks might be able to swing that comfortably, others won't. If you feel like you can cast it without an issue and you're lucky enough to get it, then I would say go for it. Shadow Spear, here's some pushed equipment. 1 casting cost, 2 to equip, legendary artifact equipment, it's a rare. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has trample and lifelink. And it has another ability. Pay 1, permanents your opponent's control, lose hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. Where do we begin? Let's say limited first and get that out of the way. Yes, it's going to be good. It's really cheap, really easy to equip as long as you have a creature to put it on. That creature is going to get bigger, have trample and lifelink. Especially when you have like big dumb creatures that don't have trample, don't have evasion. This is a way for them to push their damage across and also gain you life at the same time. This is a rare, so you won't see it a lot, but this is a powerful card. It's not great on its own necessarily in Drafter Sealed, unless you do have to use that ability on a god or something, which I guess could happen, right? But most of the time, you're going to really just want to strap this onto a creature and attack in, and that's going to be more than good enough for what you paid for it. Standard, yeah, I do think it sees standard play. It will most likely be more of a sideboard card, though, I think in your constructed formats to deal with things like gods or any hexproof creatures that could come around that you're worried about in the future even. It's nice to have these kind of answers for standard. I do think this will see play to deal with gods out of sideboards now, and could see play in the future to deal with other problems that we don't even know about yet. Beyond that, I think this has the chance to see Pioneer and maybe even modern sideboard play, just depending on where those metas go. Alright, that concludes our cards for today. We're going to come back tomorrow. We're going to look at all the cards that are previewed over the next 24 hours or so join us then. But until next time, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible through the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page, as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.